So welcome to PhUSE Webinar Wednesday. I appreciate everybody joining and taking the time out of your busy day to listen to what we have to say today. I'm Scott Bahlavooni. I'm one of the PhUSE Working Group Directors, and I will give you a bit of an overview of some of the happenings that are going on around the PhUSE community, and I'm going to hand it over after that to 3 or 4 presenters from the Computational Science Collaboration Working Groups to talk to you about some exciting new projects that we have going on, as well as to report out from a couple of projects that we've had ongoing now for a while. So if we get into the PhUSE news, if you will, hopefully you by now have realized that the 2018 itself is just around the corner, which means in March of 2018, the Computational Science Symposium will be occurring in beautiful Silver Spring, Maryland. It is a week earlier than it normally is, being held from March 4th to March 6th. The registration is now open, so I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the early bird registration ends in January of next year, so we would encourage you to register early. We are currently accepting poster submission for the CSS poster session, which usually occurs on Sunday evening. So I know that for those of you, we've had some questions at PhUSE about the difference between the Computational Science Symposium and the PhUSE annual conferences. So just to kind of clarify some of that, the Computational Science Symposium, for those of you who may not have attended in the past, or those of you who've attended and just kind of have some questions about the differences between some of the PhUSE conferences, the Computational Science Symposium is a working meeting. So if you show up to the CSS, which we hope you do, it's an opportunity for you to roll up your sleeves and actually put your brain power to work on some projects that we have ongoing within the context of the CS collaboration. You'll hear about a few of those projects today. It's also a great opportunity at the CSS to engage with folks from regulatory agencies. We usually have a great representation from folks at the FDA. Silver Spring, Maryland is right in their backyard. Last year we had over 60 folks attend the CSS from the FDA. We also have folks from the PMDA and EMA as well that have been attending Computational Science Symposium. So again, it's a great opportunity for you to roll up your sleeves, do some work that will benefit clinical research and regulatory science, as well as engage with some of the regulators. So PhUSE is also excited that in 2018, it's our first annual US Connect event. So for the last 10+ years, PhUSE has been hosting a Connect event in the European Union, and this is its first Connect event in the United States, and that event will be held from June 3rd to June 6th in 2018. The call for papers closes Friday, so if you're like me, you are probably going to be up really late on the 30th getting your abstract submitted to PhUSE to be able to hopefully have it accepted and join us in beautiful Raleigh, North Carolina in June, and then present to your peers. And that's really what the differentiator between the Connect events and the Computational Science Symposium. At the Connect events, it's really more about learning from your peers and engaging with your peers. It's an opportunity for you to share your experiences in clinical research and regulatory science, as well as learn from other people. So there's a slight subtle difference between the two conferences. We do hope that you actually take the time out of your 2018 to show up to both sessions. But if you have questions about the difference between the two, or just the timing-wise, please feel free to type those questions into the chat window in the GoToWebinar. We will address those at the end of the session. So just a couple of other PhUSE news updates before I turn it over to the folks that are really the reason why we're here. So we held our first single-day event in the Southern Hemisphere in Africa, in Bloemfontein, South Africa in November. So we're excited to continue to expand the reach of PhUSE and move into new locations. And we hope to run more events in the Southern Hemisphere in the future. We're looking at perhaps holding an event either in South America, and we're also, even though looking at other opportunities to host additional events as well. The 2018 calendar for the single day events is coming soon, so pay attention to the PhUSE website, and hopefully we will see you next year at a single day event. We would like to recognize some folks that have been outstanding contributors to PhUSE during 2017, and these three folks that you see on the screen have dedicated a lot of their time and efforts to making the PhUSE community a success. So there are the full details of these contributions are available in the PhUSE newsletter, which should either be appearing in your inbox shortly or is available from the PhUSE website. So there are a lot of opportunities to stay up to date with what is going on in the PhUSE community. You can follow us on social media and Twitter. We may not be as interesting as some folks that are currently tweeting on Twitter, but we have a lot of things to provide you that you can get access to if you are a Twitter fan or tweeter, whatever the current acronym is. We also, like I said, the PhUSE winter newsletter is coming, as well as some of the mail shots. It's a great way to stay engaged and understand what's going on within the PhUSE community. So I just want to give you a brief debrief of the 2017 CDISC Interchange. PhUSE had a stream at the 2017 CDISC Interchange where we discussed some of the activities within the PhUSE community, specifically within the computational science collaboration, and how PhUSE and CDISC are working together to collaborate and expedite the clinical trial lifecycle, implement standards effectively, support the regulators in their guidance for standardized study data. We also heard some great presentations from the CDISC leadership around a new direction for CDISC and new opportunities and some more formalization of some of CDISC's processes. So I was encouraged, both as a member of the PhUSE community as well as someone that has a day job in clinical research, with what I heard from CDISC as an organization. I think if you joined our webinar in September, you heard the new CDISC CEO, David Bobbitt, say it's a new day at CDISC, and I think the 2017 CDISC Interchange is really evidence of that. So I would ask that if you've been engaged with CDISC in the past, to continue that engagement. If you're looking for opportunities, I think CDISC is looking for people to continue to help support them as well. So we on the PhUSE side recognize that and are looking forward to continued successful collaborations with CDISC. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We have these annual series of webinars, which we call our Marching to March webinars, which provide you information about the Computational Science Symposium in March. So you'll get some overviews of projects. You'll see early in 2018, we'll have webinars that are focused on what to expect at the 2018 meeting. So we hope that you continue to join us on these webinars. As I mentioned, the registration and call for posters is now open. We would encourage you to register. As I had mentioned, there is a large contingent from the regulatory agencies that attends these events, and it's a great opportunity for you to engage with the regulators. Again, the early bird registration closes in late January of 2018, so if you have to wait for the budgetary cycle, you do have a few weeks in January 18 to actually register for the event. So we hope to see you in beautiful Silver Spring in March at the CSS, and then again see you at the US Connect event in Raleigh, North Carolina in June. And before I hand this over to the presenters, I just want to get a quick plug-in for a new project stream in one of the PhUSE Computational Science Collaboration Working Groups, the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards Working Group. So they've had a project around data submissions, and that project is going to slightly shift focus in early 2018 to look at industry experiences around the submission of standardized study data. So we've heard a lot, especially from the FDA, and for those of you who are at the CDISC Interchange, there was a presentation from the PMDA on their submission, their experiences submitting or receiving standardized study data. So what we're looking to do on the PhUSE side is get the industry perspective. How are industry folks interacting with the regulators around the receipt of standardized study data? Are there things that industry folks are seeing in response to their standardized study data submissions that would be useful to share with your peers in industry? So you'll see that project coming in January of 2018. You'll probably see a call for participants coming out soon. So if you have submitted standardized study data and you want to share your experiences with your peers, this project is a great opportunity to do so. Speaking of new projects, I am now going to hand the presentation over to Sara Pauwels, who will talk us through another new project in the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards Working Group. So Sara, let me hand this over to you. And again, if you have questions, please type them into the chat window and we will get to them if time permits at the end of the session. All yours, Sara.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, and thank you also for your very interesting presentation and information on what is coming. Really great to see all these conferences and presentations and webinars where we all can share information. Okay, I'm very happy that I can share with you now a new project that we are kicking off in the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards working group at PhUSE, and that project is related to the GDPR impact on data collection practices. So there is a changing regulatory environment always. We are evolving and changing in clinical research, but in the EU there is a new data protection regulation released that really replaces the existing data protection framework under the EU Data Protection Directive. And this really focuses on strengthening more and more the protection of personal data across the EU. And there are a lot of items discussed in this new regulation. They are getting, as I said, more strict, strengthening personal data collection. They are really speaking about sensitive personal data and broadening that definition. So anything that has to do with health and genetic data of subjects is considered very sensitive health information, personal information, and assigned actually these special categories. And these special categories of personal data, they need to have enhanced control requirements, enhanced consent requirements, things like that. They also speak, and I'm just very high level here, about an increased territorial scope. So we're looking at trials not carried out by companies in the EU, but this speaks about all trials that have EU subjects in their trials or on their sites that need to be in line with this new regulation. It speaks about data portability, the principle of minimization. So you really are only allowed to collect information that you need scientifically. You should be able to prove that you need every data field that you are collecting about a subject's health. And also there is this item: subjects have the right to have their personal data erased. So a trial participant can at any time request that all of their data be removed without undue delay, it says. And there is a lot to this. And luckily there is some text in the regulation that, of course, if we have this data used for enabling of scientific research, then we can limit certain of these individual rights. But these are all things in general that this regulation speaks about. Now, in May 2016, this regulation was released, and in May 2018, this will be a requirement that we follow this regulation. But we've seen that in the meantime, this is a global regulation within Europe, that in the meantime some countries, and probably most of them, are looking into this regulation and are releasing actually their own local legislation and guidances. And I really would like to provide you here with an example that we would like to discuss, to open a forum to speak about this. And that example that I want to speak about is date of birth. So you know the regulation is becoming more strict on this personal data collection. Health information is many times spoken about in this regulation. And what we saw this year is that based on this new GDPR, for example, the France government released a law that says that trials with first patients after the 14th of August 2017 should not collect day of birth anymore. So we as pharma companies are not allowed to collect a day of birth or a full date of birth for any French subject that is older than 2 years. Now, in our company, we really try to quickly come with solutions and adapted our EDC systems. We've spoken to some other companies. And what we were finding is, if we look at the EU and if we look at the different country regulations about date of birth specifically, then we see a lot of variety. We see for Germany, it's not a law, but there is a very strong recommendation to only collect year of birth. In the Netherlands, there is discussions going on already for some years about, can you collect a full date of birth? Is that too much? Is that too much information to really identify a person behind all the information we have in our clinical trials? And then we have France now that came up with this, and maybe others will follow and have their own rules. So our question here is, how are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with the current EU landscape on date of birth collection, and how can we as companies quickly react on further evolutions? And we're really thinking about, is there maybe a standard that we can, a standard approach for collecting date of birth? Can we do that? Can we have like some discussions, maybe a white paper later on? Okay, if we want to make sure that we are compliant with all these different regulations, do we then need a standard, and can we come with such a standard? And I've been talking with a few companies, and I know, for example, some companies are looking into it, and they are thinking about, okay, what would it mean for us if we in the future only collect the year of birth and the age? Would that be feasible? Can we work with that? I know another company where we were in contact with that said, oh, but we are not collecting anything about date of birth. The only thing we collect is age. And these are the discussions that we really want to open in this working group. Okay, so very short, the goal of this working group is to share experience and approaches for collecting date of birth, and trying to see, okay, how can we deal with this variety? How can we make sure that we are compliant with the GDPR, but also with the local regulations of countries that base, of course, their laws and regulations on this global EU regulation. Deliverable, if we can come to some kind of standard or best practices documentation, then maybe we might come with a white paper to summarize these experiences. And I have now been focusing on date of birth because that was a very clear example, but I'm sure that when we open this forum and when we talk to different people of different groups in different organizations, then it might also be worth to explore other items of this GDPR with aspects to the patients that have the right to have their data forgotten and the audit trail, and are we safe as pharma companies because we are linked to this scientific research. And yeah, open that forum and see what we as companies think and can come up with. So that was very, very quickly the explanation of this new working group that we are kicking off. And if you are interested in joining the team, then you can also always contact Wendy Dobson from PhUSE, or myself, and we welcome anyone who is interested to discuss this kind of item. So thank you for listening. I'm going to now make Nate Blevins the presenter, and Nate is going to speak about ODM for submissions.
So hi, this is Sam Hume. Go ahead, Nate.
I was just going to say over to you.
So this is Sam, and I'll lead us in our discussion of ODM for submissions, and I'm representing myself along with Nate and Marcelina as the co-leads of this this new project that exists in the Emerging Trends and Technologies Workgroup category. And as the name suggests, we are taking a look at essentially exploring and assessing the feasibility of a broader ODM-based data exchange standard set up for regulatory style submissions. And so if you flip to the next slide, Nate. So as I'm sure you're all familiar with, we moved quite some time ago from define PDF to define XML. So we started to make a transition to more machine readable content in submissions. But in today's world, obviously, we have sort of a broad set of different types of formats. And the one that gets the most attention is the SAS version 5 transport format. And as we also heard at the CDISC interchange recently, there's a sort of broad commitment to moving off this onto something new, and so that we can move forward past some of the limitations that exist in that format. So Set XML has gotten a lot of attention. So in many cases, when we think about ODM for submissions, we think, well, we have define and we have Set XML. We ran a pilot and showed that could work, but it could be, there's a broader picture, and the broader picture is define plus dataset, but we can also do, we have ODM metadata for case report forms, and annotated case report forms could be done that way. There is another PhUSE project that exists to examine and create an XML-based version of the data reviewer's guide in XML. So the idea is here, what if we look broadly at a consistent format for our submissions? What are the benefits, sort of the opportunities, as well as the hurdles to making that sort of move? So in this project, what we're looking to do is to paint that bigger picture and kind of say, well, we have stable standards that can address these issues today, and provide us with some new capabilities. For example, if we had all the metadata in a machine readable format, including the case report form metadata, we could do things like we demonstrated with Trace XML, producing end-to-end traceability. Again, if we get the data reviewer's guide in XML, additionally, new style sheets could be pulling content from all our different XML files to, again, paint some interesting pictures that would be useful for researchers and reviewers alike. And then secondly, to think about, well, that's a state that we could establish that might provide some nice benefits, but then what about going forward? How do we ensure that we can continue to move forward and take advantage of new technologies and capabilities going forward? So the idea is that we look forward ahead then to ODM2 a bit and say, well, again, if we started with a stable ODM-based submission today, moving forward, then there are new features coming along that could also be interesting, such as the specification for an API, moving beyond just XML to also support JSON and RDF, and a number of other new features that we're looking to add to ODM2. So how could we create a path forward? So those are the things that we're seeking to assess and examine in this project. We're just in the initial stages today. one of the things that we're looking to do to kind of build on that, that assessment is to drill a little deeper and do a qualitative study where we look across a broad range of stakeholders and get their input to understand more completely different perspectives on what the benefits might be, as well as what are the hurdles and challenges, and sort of what's the state of where we're at today in terms of what it would take to move in this direction. So in these initial stages in the project, we are certainly open to volunteers that would help with the paper itself, to contribute and review to painting that picture that we talked about. Additionally, and probably the least time-consuming way to participate would be also as one of the interviewees, where we'll look to get your take on again, the benefits as well as the challenges and hurdles of what it would take to move something like this forward. Our goal then is to produce a draft paper by the summer, by the end of June, and we're targeting a final paper to summarize the overall, both painting the picture in terms of what would an ODM for submission look like, as well as the findings from our qualitative study, and have that ready to present at the EU Annual Connect Conference. And on the next slide, we have a little summary of our timeline. So today, we're working on recruiting the project team and folks that are interested in participating, both in helping with the paper as well as just being someone that's interested in sharing their opinions via an interview. We're also working on an initial draft paper outline. So we'll have, for interviewees, we'll have a pre-read that puts together a packet of information about ODM for submissions, so that we have a common basis so we can start the discussion, the interview, based on that content. And then once we complete the interviews, which we'll look to do kind of first quarter of next year, then we'll analyze those results and get those into a draft paper. And once we have a draft paper finished, we'll start to work that toward do an internal review, which will include our work group leads, and then with the goal of getting that to the steering committee in time for a public review and comment resolution prior to producing a final paper that we target for the EU Annual Connect Conference. So that's really just a summary of this new project, ODM for submissions, and a little bit about the timeline and where we're at now. And again, if interested, we're open to accepting volunteers to both help with the paper as well as to be interviewed, so that we can include your inputs into the final assessment. So thank you.
Okay, and Shital, I think you should have it now.
You don't see my screen yet, do you?
Oh, I think we do. I think show us your put the presentation up. There we go. Perfect.
Basically, this project came from the single day event presentation I made at Bayer in August 2017, and this stems from some of my experiences at Genentech, which is we see an industry trend where basically there's an extrapolation of clinical endpoints that is now incorporating genomics data as well as standard clinical trial data into statistical computing environments. And we were looking to see what were some of the, similar to what Sara is looking, which is what are some of the data standards and the metadata requirements and some of the clinical data requirements that would be necessary to incorporate genomics data into a bias test computing environment, which would corroborate in terms of how information is collected, to what extent would, GDPR is a perfect example. What regulatory rules and what are some of the compliance rules that would be necessary? And then also, how would you actually optimize and scale and optimize the biostats computing environment with different file formats? Janssen was mentioned, fast transfer files, et cetera. That would be consistent with FDA and European reporting standards. So that's the general idea of the paper, and kind of a best practices output is the deliverable. And I just wanted to give you guys a flavor for the presentation itself. So we were talking about how you can leverage machine learning and Google TensorFlow and statistical optimization algorithms to mine clinical data repositories for study design as well as analysis, and as well as identification of clinical endpoints by mining genomics data sets. But in order to do that, there are privacy rules that have to be adhered to, data collection rules that have to be adhered to, and the like. And one of the successes was the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma trial that I connected at Genentech, where we looked at specific immunoglobulin, like region of the DNA chain, and we identified specifically 26 patients that would have been excellent targets for that particular clinical trial design. So eventually, the protocol design as well as the statistical plan incorporated some of the genomics data sets into the trial design and execution. But now, to adhere to new privacy laws and data standardization requirements, we thought an industry-wide consortium best practices paper would be useful to how would actually all this data be incorporated into a biostats computing environment. So that's the crux of the initiative, and I guess some type of white paper best practices or a standardization deliverable is the point of the effort. So anybody interested, give me a holler. Who should I send it to now?
Oh, sorry. You can just pass the presentation to Jane Lozano, and she will talk to us about the Study Data Standardization Plan project and the Optimizing Use of Data Standards Working Group. Again, as a reminder, while Jane's getting her presentation brought forward, that if you have questions for any of our presenters, please feel free to type them into the GoToWebinar chat functionality or question functionality. We will answer those at the end of the session.
Can you see my screen now?
Perfect. If you just talk a little louder, Jane, we're just having your volume is a little low.
Oh. All right. Is this better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to discuss what is going on with the Study Data Standardization Plan. This is not a new project. This is something that actually I looked back, and our very first kickoff was in July of 2014, which was just a few months after my very first CSS in 2014. We've made a lot of improvements and changes along the way, and I'm very happy to report that we are pretty much seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. What has happened since 2016 at our PhUSE conference, the CSS, is that CBER has now, they wanted an appendix added to our template. They want to use the same template that CDER uses, which is fantastic because now we're all going to be using the same one regardless of whether it's CBER or CDER. The appendix at the PhUSE was a separate document. Now it is incorporated into the template so that there is just one template for the Study Data Standardization Plan with an appendix for CBER at the end. And if you're doing a CDER submission of the plan, then you don't need the appendix. We updated our completion guidelines, all very clear on how that is supposed to work when you create an SDSP. An example document was created for CBER. We had example documents already out there for CDER. Now we have one for CBER. We got all of the feedback from FDA from their FR Notice for Intent to Review as incorporated into the deliverables. We had to change the definition because there was some concern on the meaning that we currently had. Now we are going to use what is in clinicaltrials.gov. as the definition of a clinical. This is just for clinical completed study. We also added a legacy definition for non-clinical. We had a lot of discussion at CSS, and after that our definition of legacy is different between clinical and non-clinical. So we were able to add that into the template. The deliverables have been sent to the PhUSE Steering Committee for a final review, and my hope is that we will be able to publish them out on our PhUSE Wiki by the end of this year and have it out there with the reviewers' guides that are already out on the wiki, and having this as our version 1.0 for people to use. Not to say that you can't use it now, because where I work, we've submitted several SDSPs to FDA, but we will have an official version of the template like we do for the reviewers' guides. And I'm confident that that will be done by the end of this year. Something that I wanted to make sure that people noticed also is that in the Technical Conformance Guide update in October, that there is a link to the PhUSE Wiki for a template. There used to be one out on FDA's site. They have taken that out and have put into the Technical Conformance Guide that they're not saying you have to use a specific template, but an example is available at the link, which is the PhUSE Wiki. Fantastic to see. That will be when we have the version, then we should be able to go to the same link. And then also the information is here about CBER and creating an SDSP and an appendix, which we did. Wonderful to see that. Also, I noticed a couple of other things in the TCG that if you have questions about custom domains, whether it's clinical or even send, that should be documented in the SDSP. That's what this document is for, to have those discussions early before end of phase 2 meeting on what your standards are, what you've used in the past, what your approach is, whether you are going to up version from SDTM 3.1.1 to 3.1.2. And in my experiences of submitting an SDSP is that FDA does look at that, and they do look at those standards and have come back with some questions about that. But they want to have those discussions early so that they're not at the end not wanting to refuse data or send messages back because it's not in a standard that is supported in the data standards catalog. And that is it as far as my update. And if you have any questions about it, I can address those at the end of the meeting. Now, what do I do, Scott?
You can hand it back to me, and I think that will wrap us up and open the floor for questions. So I know that we had one question to start with from for Sam and Nate. So the question was, is the ODM submission standard being proposed, is that the same as Dataset XML? Is it pure ODM? Can you provide a little bit more clarity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the goal and sort of the big picture that I was talking about is a consistent ODM-based submission, so all the data and metadata is in one format. That includes, yes, Dataset XML for the dataset data. It also would include ODM, the base ODM, as a way to represent metadata for annotated case report forms, in addition to what we currently have in Define XML as well as the PhUSE Data Reviewers Guide in XML. So the goal is a consistent format using kind of existing standards that would include Dataset XML in addition to ODM and Define. And we're also looking to build on some existing work. So we have the, you're probably familiar with the PhUSE alternate transport format report. There's the Dataset XML pilot report. There was the 2007 FDA ODM submission pilot announcement. So these are some other bits that we'll look to pull into this particular project. But good question.
So I think that this project, in my opinion, is a great example of the opportunities for CDISC and PhUSE to collaborate to, again, sort of advance the way that from the industry side, we conduct clinical research, and then from the regulatory side to support regulatory science. Excuse me. So it seems like we have one more question. Our PhUSE office, who is always great at running these webinars, is feverishly typing that away. So the question is, could you, the contact for the statistical computing environment is Shital Desai, and I should have mentioned that these presentations will be made available to you on the PhUSE website probably a week to 2 weeks after the webinar, as well as the recording. So if you have colleagues that may have missed the webinar or you wanted to go back and review certain sections, the recording will be made available as well. So with that being the final question, I want to again thank the presenters for providing us with a wealth of information today and for all the great work that they're doing to advance the PhUSE community. I want to thank the audience for taking time out of your busy day to join us. And I hope you have a great end of 2017, and we look forward to seeing you at the webinars in 2018 as well as the 2018 CSS and US Connect. So thanks everyone for your time, and we will see you in 2018.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.